Let's roll. Good morning. Yesterday we discussed the difference between a chacham and a navon. Sonny, remember what the difference between a chacham and a navon is?
Yeah, chacham is somebody who studies, and navon is somebody who's able to
apply the wisdom that he studied to day-to-day life, right? So we discussed how really a navon is something is much greater than a chacham, because he could put it to fruition what he has learned, right? And a chacham is just the knowledge that he has. We give an example that a person who studies, right, that's a chacham, but a person who uses that study to apply it, for example, a rabbi, he studied the Shulchan Aruch, he didn't just study it, but he learned cases to apply it to day-to-day life. Now, we're on Pasuk Zayin. It's actually interesting. The Pasuk says, Yirat Adonai Reshit Dat, Chochma Umusar Avelim Bazu, which means the fear of God, of Hashem, is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. Now, he said, actually, so here we learn something powerful, that the foundation of all knowledge starts with Yirat Hashem. Yesterday we had a difference between Yirat Haromimut. Remember that we had a difference between what type of Yirah is healthy? But he says here that you could be brilliant in whatever it is, but if you do not have awe in God of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's useless, right? And the fool says that I don't need this, I'll do whatever I want to do. But the wise man says, I'll do this with the guidelines of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with the guidelines that God gave us. Now Rashi actually explains on this that chokhmah, true wisdom, must be built on the recognition and the foundation of the creator of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why? Because it's this awareness that really awakens a person's desire to pursue Torah and the spiritual understanding. We're on Pasuk Zayin. Now yirah, this concept of yirah is to wisdom what a foundation to a building is. And I'll give you an example, right? I'm sure a lot of people know that if a building doesn't have a solid foundation, the building gets destroyed. Now that's how it is, yirah to chokhmah. In order to have true chokhmah, true wisdom, you have to have that yirah in order to accompany that
yirah is fear of Hashem.
Yirah is fear of Hashem. Now we also discussed which type of fear. Is it fear because you're scared of Him, or is it fear because you want to get close to Him? But it's Yirat HaRamimut. You want to get close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because how could I do such a thing to our Father in heaven? That's what what's his name in the back had Stanley yesterday, right? That was
saying that you're thinking that would be the first stop should be the fear.
The fear, but again, what type of fear? That's the idea.
Right. So they could both be fear.
Right. Now we know that all forms of wisdom really rest upon certain basics that a person has. For example, science depends on the observation and the experimenting wisdom, but the wisdom spoken of in Mishlei is not humanly derived. It's really the wisdom of the Torah and the cultivation of good midot and good character traits. That's what really the wisdom is. And the foundations cannot be grasped upon by itself. Rather, it has to come from HaKadosh Baruch Hu by learning His Torah. And for this reason, it's really impossible to acquire wisdom without Yirat Hashem, because you need Yirat Hashem to acquire that wisdom. Fear of God really means believing in Him fully and accepting His word no matter what, without the resistance of anger or whatever it is. And it's a starting point for fulfilling really all of His mitzvot and living by what He says. That's exactly what the Malbim says. The Malbim says that that's really what Yirat Hashem is. Now, an example of this is that you have a talented person uses his gift for self-promotion versus using it to help others. Right? You have a person who's smart and uses it for himself and uses it to boost his own ego, whereas the other person uses it to help other people with his talents. That's really the idea. Now, the idea is that chokhmah umusar avelim bezu, really that fools despise wisdom and discipline. Shlomo HaMelech really contrasts this to a wise man who builds on Yirat Hashem, with the fool, which is the evil, who rejects the very tools of growth, wisdom and musar. And I'll give you an example. You have people who want to become great and are improving their Torah lifestyle, and their friend is not down. Their friends are not down. So what does a friend do? The friend says, "You're doing that, you're a loser," or "You're doing that, you're too religious." Right? That's the fool, really, because the fool can't be like you. So what happens? He tries to lower you down. Exactly what happened with Charlie Kirk. They killed him. Why? Because they wanted to silence him, because they didn't agree with his thoughts, so they just killed him. Now, why does the fool despise wisdom? Right? If you have friends who are fools, they'll really despise your growth, because wisdom really demands change. And real wisdom really forces us to admit our mistakes, our challenges, our habits, and take responsibility within our life. The fool doesn't want to do that. He'd rather remain in his comfortable, in his ignorance state of mind, whereas the chacham wants to change. So you got the difference between a fool and a person who's wise. A fool is not down for change. So what happens? He tries to lower yourself, for the change that you want to do. That's the difference. Now, the fool also doesn't want to admit his wrongs. Right? If you acknowledge the concept of wisdom, then you can't understand what foolness is. Right? Because he doesn't want to acknowledge that. That's that. Wisdom also has consequences. Right? If Hashem is real, Torah is true, right? And Musar is the binding agent between all of this, then my actions really do matter in my life. Right? That means we have limits. That means the fool doesn't want his limits. Right? He wants to break Shabbat because he wants to go wherever at night. Whereas the Chacham, he has his limits that he wants to keep in check. The fool wants his indulgence, his its self expression within himself, and that lack of responsibility in his life. Now, the question really: why does the fool mock the concept of musar, of discipline? Because, like we said, that it means accountability. So if you can't be like them, you beat him. It's not really this abstract wisdom. It's really a daily grind of applying the wisdom to life. That's really the idea. Whatever you learn, you have to put it to life. Next pasuk. Shema beni musar avicha ve'al titosh Torah timecha. This is actually one of the most famous pasukim that it's in Mishlei. The concept of musar avicha ve'al titosh Torah timecha, which means in English, hear my son, the discipline of your father, and do not forsake the Torah of your mother. Shlomo turns a little personal here. He says, Beni, that this concept of wisdom isn't really abstract. It's passed from parent to child, generation to generation. And fathers give the musar concept, and mothers give the Torah, the nature, and the nurture and the values. And both are needed together to build the perfect ben Torah. Right? An example of this, right? The father says, on the Shabbat table, no phones on the table, but the mother really says, no, Shabbat is a time for connection. So that's the difference. The father is usually much more strict, and the mother understands why he's saying these things. Together, really, both of them together, they'll shape the child. A teen might think today that, my parents are old-fashioned. They don't understand today. They don't know what I'm going through today. But the Mishlei teaches us that do not reject them because they really know what they are talking about. And actually, interestingly, why is he saying that here? Because really, the pasuk is teaching us here that there's really three partners in a child. Right? We know that the Gemara brings us down. There's a father, there's a mother, and there's a Kadosh Baruch Hu. All together, they ultimately make the child to become great. So the first musar a person must accept is that of his parents. To understand that his parents know what's best for them, but best for him, and also Kadosh Baruch Hu knows what's best for him. So if Kadosh Baruch Hu wrote the Torah, Kadosh Baruch Hu knows what is best for that person, that child. That's that. Any questions?
It's a song.
It's a Shema, by Yaniv ben Mashiach. Yeah, it's an old song actually. I was like, whenever I hear this, that's like, the Rambam also brings us down in his letters. But yeah, then he brings down the next pasuk.
It's in the, what's it called? It's the letter that he
The letter of the Rambam, he wrote to his son. Yeah. So then he says, Ki liviatchen hem liroshecha ve'anakim ligrutecha, which means for they are an adornment of grace for your head and chains for your neck. What does that mean? Like we said, following what Shlomo says about the parents' wisdom, it isn't a burden, it actually beautifies you. And he says that it's like jewelry that makes someone shine, this thing from your parents. And so and they give you good values, and they give you respect, and they give kindness, and they give honesty, and they're attractive. The idea that today that people think that their parents don't know what's good for them, it became the problem of the generation that, my parents are too primitive, they don't understand what's good for me. But really, he says here that your parents really know what's best as well. And not only that, he says that they are like a crown for you, and they really elevate you, your parents' wisdom. And that's the end of this pasuk. Then he says, Beni, im yiftach yifatoch chataim al tavo. My child, if sinners entice you, do not consent. What is he saying here? If sinners entice you, do not consent. The concept that we have today, and I mentioned this before when we first started, that this world today tries to entice. Everyone is trying to entice you to do sins, right? They put the social media aspect, all these things online is trying to entice someone to go to the negative force. But he says here, know your values, know what you're worth, know what you want from your life, and don't let the outside world make an effect on your life, because you are great, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you that power to stay great and become great. So
Says this?
Shlomo says, don't let the outside world entice you, right? The sinners entice you, and that's what's really happening today, right? You have the media, portraying a certain message because they want you to.
He's saying, right, and that goes back to the idea of love.
Right, ultimately,
Yeah.
ultimately. I mean, that's really another definition. How do you want to describe your relationship with God? Do you want it to be out of fear? You want it out of love, right? Out of fear really doesn't last so long. Out of love lasts much longer, right? And you want to keep building on that foundation between you and God, between you and Hashem. That's really the idea here. Hashem will continue on Monday. Shabbat shalom.